and Safe School webinar series. And because this is a webinar format and I always am wondering if anyone's out there who can hear me, I like to start off with just a show of hands to see if you can hear me. So if you can hear me, go ahead and raise your hand, and you should be able to find that on your toolbar. Great. Looks like lots of people can hear me, so hopefully most of you can. And that is the same function that you can use if you want to ask a question later in the webinar. So I'll explain a little bit about that, but that's the same function that you'll be able to use. So again, my name is Mila Kelly. I'm the coordinator of the Peaks to Prairies Pollution Prevention Center based in Bozeman, Montana, and I'm very pleased to be hosting this set of webinar presentations. And before we get started with today's presentation, which is bullying and restorative practice, I just want to give you a brief introduction to our series and give you all a couple of different housekeeping webinar points. So Peaks to Prairies, EPA, and the Wyoming Department of Education have worked together to design a series that highlights what we know to be critical components to a children's learning environment. The intent of this series that we put together is really to provide school and school district administrators, custodial, maintenance staff, basically anyone who's involved with our schools with some information and tools to move towards creating as healthy an environment as possible for our school children and school staff. So each Wednesday, starting 2 weeks ago, and we'll be continuing for another 3 weeks, I, along with a lot of experts in these fields, are giving you as much practical information, case studies, implementation strategies for each of these topics. Each session is recorded and available for future use on www.peakstoprairies.org/webinars, and you can shoot me an email if you're having trouble finding those. And a couple weeks ago, we started with school chemical cleanouts. From there, we moved into greening issues that dealt with the building itself. So things like green cleaning products, building materials, and some slightly scary realities of PCB and lead in some of our older facilities. And today, we're addressing a different but equally important aspect of children's health, and that is bullying and the opportunity to utilize restorative practices in the school setting. Coming up in the next 3 weeks, we have first aid, integrated pest management. That's learning how you can use alternatives to herbicides and pesticides on your school's landscaping and ball grounds. And then finally, we finish up with waste reduction and recycling within the school. So as I mentioned, I'm the coordinator of a program called Peaks to Prairies. It's a pollution prevention information center for EPA's Region 8, which is a fairly large western region: Montana, Wyoming, North Dakota, South Dakota, Utah, and Colorado. We're one of 8 EPA-funded regional centers whose mission is basically to distribute tools and information to a huge array of audiences, all for the purpose of aiding in the practice of pollution prevention. So we're just basically here to help get information out. And pollution prevention is a term that we use, which really just means eliminating or reducing the generation of a waste at the source rather than controlling pollution at the so-called end of the pipe. So we're preventing it before it begins. We're a program under Montana State University's Department of Extension and Housing and Environmental Health, and we're based in Bozeman. As a few housekeeping notes, you are all, in the interest of maintaining a quiet listening environment, you are all muted. So we can't hear you, but we do want this to be as interactive as possible. So we want to answer questions, and we can do that in a couple of different ways. You can use your question pane on your toolbar. So you should see a questions box, and you can expand that, type in a question, and send it to everyone or to myself as an organizer. The other way of asking a question is to raise your hand, and it looks like most of you found that, that icon. And if you raise your hand, I can see that you've raised your hand, and then I can unmute your line, and we'll all be able to hear you ask your question. So that's another option for questions. If you can't see your question pane, you might be able to find that in the top line of your toolbar under View. And if you click on the View and look down, there should be a question line, and you can click that to bring up the option of typing in a question. We'll have a couple of opportunities for questions after each presentation. We've got two presentations today. The first one is Bruce Hayes, who is the Facilities and School Safety Consultant for the Wyoming Department of Education. He's a really great advocate for healthy and safe schools. And our second presenter is John Bailey, who's an educational trainer for the International Institute for Restorative Practices. And one other thing, before I turn it over to Bruce, is I'm going to periodically, I may ask a couple of questions through a poll. Like I said, we really want this to be as interactive as possible, and I thought that to give Bruce and John an idea of what their audience is like and who they should be gearing their presentation towards, I was going to ask you all a couple questions first. So the first question I wanted to find out was what job function most closely resembles what you do. Are you superintendent or principal, teacher, nurse, facility manager, or something else? And I'll give you a few seconds to put in your answers. And looks like, oops, it went away. Oh, here we go. Okay, it looks like 43% of you are teachers, 7% are nurses, 50% are others. Great. Thank you very much. Okay, and the second thing we wanted to find out was where you're from. And I'm losing my, sorry. Okay, was where you're located. If you're located in Wyoming, if you're located in another part of EPA's Region 8, or if you were located elsewhere. Okay, that one doesn't seem to be working. But, okay, no, here we go. Okay, it looks like 67% of you are located in Wyoming, 7% are in EPA's Region 8, other parts of EPA's Region 8, and 27% are elsewhere. So hopefully that can help Bruce and John sort of guide their presentations. And thank you for your answers. And from there, I'm going to turn this over to Bruce Hayes.
Thank you, Isla. Appreciate that. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this webinar. It is good to be with you. My part, of course, is bullying. Now, to start, I just want to say something real quick. On the opening page, you can see the title of this presentation. You might see a reflection under the letters. I've been hearing that some people see reflections under there. My doctor assures me that there's only really two reasons why anyone would see that. One, there's some suffering of mild delusional medical conditions, or there's been some heavy drinking before the webinar. But I'm sure you all are just fine.
Hey, Bruce, I'm going to interrupt for 1 second, and I want to remind you to hit show my screen.
Okay, hold on. We had that. How about now?
Perfect.
Okay, we're up now?
You're up.
Okay, good. Okay, we're going to cover 3 areas right now in this short presentation. We're going to cover the new Wyoming law and the Wyoming Anonymous Tip Line and some of the best practices that have to do with bullying. Now, there's a lot of different areas we could cover, but we're going to focus on bullying. And the reason we're going to do that is because, one, it's a national concern. Two, it is a strategy item for the Department of Education to address that. And number 3, it's a 2007 parent survey we conducted showed that 52% of all the parent respondents who had kids in public schools said bullying is their most urgent safety concern. And so it seems to be growing on our radar scope and intensity. Now, today, I didn't get the chance to put this on the screen you're seeing because this data came out actually a number of hours ago is when I got it. I do want to, we had a fixed number of frames, and it was difficult to put it in. But I need to cover this, and this little part's going to be audio only, but it shows the kinds of problems we're facing. I'm going to refer, and many of you may have seen this already. I know 2/3 of you are in the state, and if you're from out of state, you probably have a similar tool. But according to the Wyoming Youth Risk Behavior Survey, there are some things we track over time. And I want to go over some of those questions. In the middle school, here, at least here in our state, the percentage of students who have ever carried a weapon, such as a gun, knife, or club, is in 2009 was 55%. In 2001, that was 43%. And so that's an increase of roughly 25, 26% over those years. If we consider the percentage of students who did not go to school one or more of the past 30 days because they felt unsafe, that was 6.1%. Well, folks, in 1995, that was 3.4%. So over time, that has gone up. Well, how about the percentage of students who had been threatened or injured with a weapon, such as a gun, knife, or club, on school property? That's 9.4%, according to the YBS. That was 7.3% in 1995. So, and I can go on, and all of the indicators are up of the problems and dangers that are occurring in school that are directly or indirectly related to bullying. So that is a big concern. So that's some data we need to be aware of. And we're going to start with the Wyoming law and talk about our anonymous tip line and go through some of the best practices. And there's a delay on my switch. I don't know why. Hold on. As I'm waiting for the screen to change, I will go over, this is probably one of the more scarier ones, the percent of students who were in a physical fight one or more times during the past 12 months. That is reported at 30.9% in 2009, as opposed to 35% in 1995. So, Milo, we're locked up a little bit here. I'm not sure why. Bear with me here.
Bruce, can you click the arrows on the bottom left?
Yeah, that's what we're doing here.
Oh.
And when we set up, it was sticking. We talked about that, but then it unstuck itself. And this time it's not unsticking itself. So I'm going to try some different things. Okay. Let me see here. Okay, now it's unstuck. I draw your attention to the top, Bully Police. There's a website. If you haven't gone to the Bully Police website, I would urge you to do so. And basically, the Bully Police, it's a national watchdog organization that really looks at all the policies all over the United States. Now, if you happen to live in Wyoming, this might be of special significance to you. Our policy was graded an A++ with this organization. And the lady who started this organization, her son was killed in a bullycide at school. So she's intellectually and emotionally engaged. So, I mean, she's connected with this, and she was really impressed with Wyoming law. Now, I don't, you might hate your senator or you might love your senator. But however you feel about them, suspend those feelings because they did a great job with the law. And the reason it got an A++, because of all the dimensions it covered, we're going to cover the tip of the iceberg on those. Wyoming was the only state in the Mountain West region to receive that particular grade and designation. If you want to look at the content more fully, I took the occasion to actually list the statute on the top. So if you want to go research it, you're free to do so. But in this particular approach our legislature took, they basically said, here's what harassment, intimidation, and bullying really is. And what it is it's gestures, electronic communication, written, verbal, physical acts that basically have the effect of, and I'm going to list three things, A, B, C, and D. A, harming a student physically or emotionally, damaging a student's property or placing a student in reasonable fear. So it's not just they do damaging things, it's if they put the student in reasonable fear of harm, or if you create an environment that's very, very diminishing. B, insulting or demeaning a student or group of students causing substantial disruption. Okay, so if you disrupt the orderly operation of a school, that's second part of the definition. And lastly, C, creating an intimidating, threatening, or abusive environment through pervasive behavior. So again, harming a student physically or emotionally, insulting or demeaning the student or group of students, messing up the orderly operation of the school, or C, damaging the environment through pervasive behavior. Now, those three things we just covered is going to be what we find later on in our state. They said to the districts, whatever you do when you form your policy, that's got to be your minimum definition. You can add to it, but we want to make sure those A, B, C, those three things are included. Now, in addition to that, there are some general directives that came out of this particular statute, and those general directives were basically that no student, it says no person, but they're including staff too, because sometimes staff bullies. There won't be any harassment, intimidation, or bullying, period. That's the goal. That's what we're angling for. And that reprisal and retaliation won't occur. One of the reasons people don't speak out against bullying is that there is a fear of, hey, you know what, after school on the playground, I'm going to really get it. And so there's a provision for retaliation. Some laws do not have provisions for retaliation. So if you're from out of state, as you deal with this bullying problem, you've got to put that in your approach, that an effort toward preventing retaliation will be there. As far as, and there's really 10 things as far as implementation I'm going to cover. This slide has 1 and 2, and the next one you'll see has 3 through 10, but I'm going to go back and cover 1 through 2. As a baseline, the school's policy approach, you've got to have a statement. And it's got to be basically, here's our mission statement, here's what we're going to accomplish. The number 2 item, there's got to be a definition. So as you work with policies, and policies are going to change over time, but you have to have an up-to-date definition of what that is. For instance, 10 years ago, sexting or anything to do with cell phones probably wouldn't have been a big deal if present at all. And now, of course, it's a huge thing. So we have to keep up with our policies and can't leave them. You have to update them at least every year. I'm going to go through 3 to 10. I'm on slide number 10. This is as far as the implementation of quality policies. There's got to be consequences and remedial actions. Our particular policies, our statute covers the need for that the districts will have do a good job at making sure that, remedial actions are covered and there's clear consequences for certain behaviors. The districts have to make sure that there's a procedure for reporting and documenting incidences, and that there's a procedure for reporting anonymously as well. Now, in this particular state, there's WeTip. If you're from Colorado, you've got the Safe to Tell. Hopefully, in your state, if you're not from Wyoming, you have a statewide tip line. I'm going to talk more about that in a minute. If you don't have a tip line, I urge you to get one, a statewide system. At the end, you'll have my number. You can call me. I urge people to call me if you've got any questions on any of this material. The districts, number 6, districts have to have a procedure for prompt investigation. You can't lay down and hope these things go away. And so on and so forth. I'm not going to read all of them, but you see what the districts have a responsibility to do. Once those policies are done, now in our state they were done at the end of the last year, so by December of 2009 these were done. They have to be accessible. And so in our state, they have to be in a single place where Comprehensive rules can be located, and in addition, each school student handbook has to have the policy so all the parents know, the students know, they're not a secret. Those are important. Now, there's some additional things that in our state the policies had to cover. There has to be professional development. Once you basically have a direction, the teachers have to know what do these policies say, what's my responsibility toward these policies, what's our plan of attack. And so PD or professional development had to be part of that. And that they'd be provided to volunteers and other people as well. Just some recommendations on policies. It's really critical for districts from the top down to have quality policies that cover contingencies and things. They're going to change over time. Some of you out there might have legislative mandates to do this, but whether you have a legislative mandate or not, it's important to happen, and that's the point of this. On the policies, you look at, does everything work? Over time, if something doesn't fit, or you need to, or the culture changes, or technology changes, and something doesn't work anymore, you've got to have at least an annual review of your policy to make sure it comes up and meets the standards and the culture and what's happening. Whether you're from Wyoming or not, you can always look at the department website, or you can see that, number 3, www.k12.wy.us. You can access it for information on the model policies and program standards. Now, in our law, they basically said we have to have program standards. And basically what that did, it basically, before I get to program standards, I want to cover this frame 14. There's a mandate that we've got to involve other people. It's best practice to involve staff and students and volunteers and a litany of groups. If these groups are properly engaged and they're properly brought in, we'll get the kind of input, we'll get the kind of work that'll help keep our schools safe. I've heard in our state that some groups, as I've talked with different people, they feel disenfranchised. They're written out. And as we, folks, the bottom line is bullying has gotten to the level where we can't afford those small issues. We can't afford disenfranchisement. We can't afford that. So there has to be efforts to include a number of folks. And you see that on frame 14. And intriguingly, this has gotten stuck again. I don't know if it's a button thing or if it's a system thing. I don't know why it's freezing up. That's very interesting. I'm going to try something else here. Okay, here we go. Here we go. I got ahead of myself. Here's the program standards. Basically, it has to do with professional development. We did not want to create any additional bureaucracy. There's enough bureaucracy toward the teachers and districts and schools and the feds. I know Charles behind other things. So we wanted this to be simple, direct, efficient, and doable when it came to program standards. Okay, so basically, I'm going to just cover 1, 3, and 4. It's got your policy has got to be easy to see on the web. It's got to be easily accessible on the web, and there has to be the staff's got to be provided with effective training. That was a standard that came from the department, and that had to align with district goals on safety, and it's got to be in a way to maximize teacher effectiveness. This is all about teacher effectiveness, and we know learning can't really happen effectively if there's bullying and other problems in the classroom. And the last thing was that there's a partnership. We encourage districts to partner with police and school resource officers regarding training and violence prevention. Sometimes they're really actively engaged, and sometimes they are not so actively engaged, but we feel there's a place for them. Okay, so that's as far as the policies go. That's the tip of the iceberg. The bottom line is that districts need very, very high quality policies. They need to be complete. They need to cover different contingencies. They need to have quality definitions. Teachers, nurses, administrators need to really know the policy and know it well and be willing to change it over time as years change and culture and technology changes. So that's that part. Now, the other thing that's really critical, I think, to no matter if you're from Wyoming or not, you need to have a statewide tip line. Here in Wyoming, of course, we have We Tip. I cannot speak highly enough about the kids that have the guts and courage to tell someone what they know through an anonymous tip line. There is a culture of silence in our students. Yet, research shows that 81% of violent incidents in U.S. schools, in those incidents, someone other than the attacker knew it was going to happen but failed to report it. Ladies and gentlemen, that is tragic. That is unbelievable. And we all remember Columbine in 1999. Well, there was a Columbine Commission report. And in that report, young people, they report, are reluctant to report threats due to a student culture that fosters and enforces a code of silence. Hence the need for a tip line of some sort. Now, we use WeTip most of the country. There's different districts that have this service. We're the first state that this particular nonprofit organization has in total, in its entirety. We felt it was critical to cover every single student statewide by this approach. And we understand the need, the kids need to feel safe. If I could refer to Dr. Del Elliott, who is from the Center of the Study and Prevention of Violence, he basically came out and said, and I'm going to quote him, in some cases there's little reason to believe that changes in curriculum or instructional practices will have any significant effect on academic performance until kids feel safe and respected in school. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we feel that the kids need to be able to speak on what they hear about that's unsafe. Historically, now WeTip has been in existence since '72, and we found that over time, now it's only been in our state since '07, but overall we've seen a performance of this organization spanning decades, and we've seen a very high deterrent to crime. It's an excellent crime-solving tool. It gives police and others information that they could find who did what particular crime. It's for all Wyoming students. Calls are taken 24/7, so a student can call from school or at home anytime during the day and anytime during the week. The particular call takers, the operators, are specifically trained to extract as much information as the caller or the tipster is willing to give. We've received about 73 tips since the program started in actually it was in Laramie 1 from about the year 2000. It was beta tested in effect, and it went statewide in 2002. A lot of advantages to having a tip line when it's used, and you know what? When it's used correctly, we've got a climate that's more positive. We've got reduced crime than there would be. There's more options available, meaning more options to kids of where they can go, who they can call, who they can talk to. Our state superintendent is on record as saying that he believes that eventually this system in our state will save lives. Okay, so it's we feel it's now in a very important part of the school safety anti-bullying climate. And it could be used in bullying. If you're a student and you witness it, you can call anonymously and talk about the bullying you're witnessing, because we found that the administrators tend to respond to these tips fairly quickly, and we're very appreciative of that. I'm on frame 19. There's some additional benefits. Now, believe it or not, there is a way to get rewards to people if there's a conviction, if you're a tipster. Now you're probably thinking, now, wait a minute, how in the world can you keep confidentiality? Excuse me, how in the world can you keep anonymity and get a reward to someone? How does that work? And I'll tell you very quickly, it's when a tipster calls, basically there's a very quick question. If there's a conviction, do you want a reward or not? And you say yes or no. Most people say no. However, if the tipster says yes, they're given a 3-part code. It's basically used if there is a conviction. That nearest post office, and all this comes out in the tip, but the nearest post office gets an envelope with the payment money in it if a reward has been requested, and the tipster comes in and gives that 3-part code, and the post office is instructed to give that money to those whoever walks in and gives that 3-part code. There's no name, no questions asked. You walk and you've got your payment for the tip. And of course, it's up to $1,000. Now, the average is about 200. What you see, the 1,000 is the maximum. Here's the critical components of the We Tip line. And you know what? Before I go over this, I urge everybody to have some. If you're out of state, and you don't have a tip line in your district, go in the district. If you can create one in your state, get one in your state. We've got a lot of feedback from ours. And we think it works pretty well, but we think we can have a higher report rate over time. We're seeing every year a higher report rate, and that's probably a good thing. But some things have to happen for this to work. There has to be brochures and posters in schools. Now, WeTip provides them to us here in Wyoming, and we send them out to the schools, but they have to be present. We have to keep that in front of the student eyes and ears, so they consider this an option. And probably the biggest thing is that number is to know it. We need to know it by heart. 1-800-78-CRIME. That's 1-800-78-CRIME. That is our tip line here in the state of Wyoming. If you're from Colorado, you've got another one, of course. I know Kansas has got a statewide tip line. Missouri's got a statewide tip line. Texas has got a statewide tip line. And the states that have that are growing. And, of course, students must be absolutely willing to use it. And if that's going to happen, there's got to be teachers, administrators, you've got to bring it up discreetly in different in classes, bring it up in pep rallies, bring it up in morning and afternoon announcements. Bring it up. Make it visible. That has to happen. That's probably the single biggest message I've got on the tip line. We got a good track record, at least on the one we've got here in the state. Again, We Tip is a nonprofit organization. It was started in 1972, and there has never been a single breach of anonymity of any caller or tipster. And they've grown to exist in all 50 states, and actually a little bit overseas as well. So we're happy with them, and we think there's a future in our state in not only reporting verbal abuse, physical abuse, bullying, but other things, drugs, vandalism, all sorts of types of crimes. We want this to be used, and so I urge you to work with your students, if you're here in Wyoming, to make this a tool that is visible and front and center. Last part of this first half is operative best practices. Now, folks, the list of best practices is truly, truly long. For our purposes, a best practice that I want to cover is one that's proven over time. It's one that's, if implemented with fidelity, can produce significant leaps, even quantum leaps in student performance and reductions in discipline referrals. Not just 5%, not just 10%, but the select things I'm going to talk about have shown those kinds of changes. And lastly, it's got to be reasonably cost effective. I mean, you can have something that'll change the world, and if it's going to bankrupt you, that's just isn't going to work. So we go to our very first one, and that is mentoring. Now, mentoring is probably it's kind of not talked about as much as it should be. Not all schools have a mentoring program, and yet we know, I'm going to focus on number 3 here, students with a quality mentor are half as likely to start drugs, and a third as likely to start drinking. Now, that's a major, major impact in the kind of student awareness if he's on drugs or drinking. You know, we're not going to get a student that's going to learn very well, at least usually not. And so when you've got a mentor involved, and there's really several kinds of mentoring. There's adult mentoring. Adult volunteers come and mentor with students, maybe grandparents or volunteers. Tutors can also double as mentors, actually. And then there's peer-to-peer mentoring. I urge you to work with your your district, your boards, to see what kind of programs exist and what kinds you really need to start. But mentoring can make a difference. As our homes, if you go back to the 50s, 80, 90% of the homes are nuclear homes, meaning mom, dad, dog, kids at home. And yet, it's just not the way it is now, at least with many homes. And so the need for a mentor is even higher than it's ever been before. And it has been proven the largest single influence in a student's chance for success. So mentoring is very important. If you don't have a quality mentoring program, we urge you to start one. And there's a lot of different providers out there that would give training on that. We're putting a package together that might be able to give some funding to districts, at least in our state, but it hasn't been approved yet, so I'm not going to go into any detail on that. But if it gets approved, you'll hear a lot more about it. Anyway, there's restorative practices. Now, John's going to talk a lot more about restorative practices, so I'm not going to go in any given depth, except that it has really, there are schools it's absolutely changed. Hull, UK, Hull is a small town in England. They've had an elementary school, or was it a middle school? One of those two. It was a school that really radically changed because of the institution of restorative practices. Bullying almost disappeared. If we're serious about bullying, we look at things like this. That will make amazing differences. And of course, there's a Woodburn School in Maryland who they instituted restorative practices. Woodburn was a school. It was a school of last resort. If a student had been involved in criminal behavior, if a student had been involved in, had a rap sheet as long as his sleeve, if there had been drug addictions, somehow they ended up in Woodburn. And you would think with an environment like that, it would be pretty chaotic. And in fact, it was once that way. And when I heard a 40-year veteran administrator talk about the changes, it would nearly bring tears to your eyes. So this is something worth hearing in a moment. John's going to cover more about that. And then lastly, peer-to-peer mediation. Peer-to-peer mediation has basically it's where you have students that volunteer to form a panel to take some of the medium to lesser problems in the school and mediate, and that frees the administrators time to do other things of greater import. It builds lifelong skills in students at mediation, which will serve them the rest of their life. It massively elevates student climate and increases academic performance. Peer-to-peer mediation is offered by a number of groups around the country. One of the most notable is PAX United out of Texas. And then there's a number of actually, there's two anti-violence programs that have really surfaced to be visible in the state. There's a number of districts around, at least in Wyoming, that utilize the Alveus, I believe it's pronounced Alveus, #1, Alveus program. It's research-based, and there's, just Google them, go to their website, and you can see the stats that they claim. And then the Safe School Ambassadors program. Now, the Laramie 1, in the particular, our district here in Cheyenne, Laramie 1 has 2 schools on the Safe School Ambassadors program, and what that has done is truly, truly amazing. That basically brings in up to 40 students per school, and they're trained to constructively and safely intervene in conflict. And discipline referrals have been cut. The common discipline referral cut here on all of these is about 70 to 75%. If the program is operated with fidelity and full purpose, you will see those kind of results. So those are the kinds of things that, and the 2 schools in Laramie 1 that do this is Central High School and McCormick High School, do Safe School Ambassadors program. And the SRO, who's associated with this, and others cannot speak highly enough of it. It has made a massive, massive difference, as all these other programs as well. That's all I've got basically for me. You see my contact information there, and I'm glad this thing didn't get stuck any more than it did. It must have been my buttons here. But I would, I guess, welcome any questions if there are any.
Thank you, Bruce. That was great. So yes, now is an opportunity for For you guys too, we'll take a few minutes before we start on our presentation about restorative practices. We'll take a few minutes to invite any questions for Bruce, and too, if you have any, if you have a particular incident that you're working on in your school, or a particular story to relate, you can raise your hand and I can unmute you and we'll all be able to hear you. And if you have just sort of a quick question, or feel more comfortable typing your question into the computer, you can click on your question pane and type that in and send it to the organizer, or send it to everybody. If you can't see your question pane, you should look in the top line of your toolbar under the View button, and under your View you should be able to find questions. So if anybody's got a question, now's a good time.
Well, while they're doing the questions, can I mention one last thing?
Absolutely.
I just want to communicate a sense of urgency to this whole thing. Every indication we've got from the parents, from the YRBS, from administrators, we've got to get a handle on how students are treated in our schools. We can't keep doing the same things we've been doing. We're going to get the same results. And if I look at the YRBS, it's accurate to plus or minus 5%. It's statistically significant. It's accurate within reason, and the trends over time are extremely telling. And they're going, since it began in 1995, some questions started in 1999, but be that as it may, all the major indicators are going up.
Why do you think that is, Bruce? Is it because there aren't enough of those types of programs that you described, the ambassador programs, the tip lines, those types of things? Is it because there's not enough of those programs, or is it because those programs aren't maybe implemented to the fullest extent within schools?
Milo, you know what? That's the $2 million question. Why is that happening? In some sociologists' minds, it's a family thing. The dynamic of the family is changing. The stability at home, where basic right and wrong is taught, it just simply isn't happening. In other sociologists' minds, it's the sexualization of society. It's more me-centered. I do what I want. I don't, rules don't make as much difference maybe as they did in years past. There's the availability of weapons. There's the availability of technology. For instance, sexting and cyberbullying. Cyberbullying is going to be a huge problem. And we have kids that are, if mom and dad are working, and who can blame them? If you've got to survive, you have to have, many households have to have 2 jobs now. So you've got that unsupervised time, from 3 to 5, 3 to 6, that, quote, stuff happens. And that's often the time frame it happens. So there's a lot of different reasons. And in order to adjust to those cultural changes, we need to implement programs we might not have had to stress before. Mentoring is going to have to be a huge thing in the future. Restorative practices is going to have to be a huge thing. Peer-to-peer mediation, there's a place for that now more than ever before. So if we're slow to implement those kinds of things, then we're going to see these numbers go up.
Okay, Bruce, well, thank you very much. And I think now if you have any additional questions, I think we'll save those until the end, but go ahead and send those to me whenever you like. And with that, I would like to turn things over to John Bailey, who I mentioned before is an educational trainer with the International Institute of Restorative Practices. And I believe you're based in Virginia. Is that right, John?
Bethlehem, Pennsylvania.
In Pennsylvania. Okay, that's right. And so I've made you the presenter, and now you can show your screen and tell us a little bit more about restorative practices.
Everybody, is that looking good, Smiley?
Yes, it is.
Okay, great. Hello, everyone. It's evening here. I guess it's still technically afternoon there. The International Institute for Restorative Practices is a graduate school based in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. I want to give you just a brief overview of what restorative practices is. I'll try not to go too far afield. But I need to talk about just the basic concept of restorative practices first, and then I'll talk a little bit about the issue of bullying and how it relates, but I think it should be obvious. The Institute for Restorative Practices was founded by two public school teachers back in the 70s. The first organization, it was actually called the Community Service Foundation, and that's the originating organization that's a part of our consortium. Basically, they just wanted to try out some different educational philosophies with young people. So they started a private school on their own with not much money, and it turned out that the only children they could get were children that nobody else wanted to teach. So they had a lot of very tough children, all in a very small building, trying out a lot of their funky notions about how education in schools might be different. So the long and short of it is, through trial and error over the 70s, 80s, and into the 90s, tried a lot of different things about how do you get people to want to learn, how do you get people to treat each other well, especially when you had students that they were dealing with, which were a much higher concentration of risk factors. How do you get them to come into a building, treat each other well, and want to behave and do the right thing without having to stigmatize and be overly punitive? I think we tried in our history a few different things. In the early days, I think Ted and Susan Wachtel, the founders, would admit they were probably a little permissive. You know, they were kind of children of the 60s and whatnot. Moving into the 80s and 90s, honestly, and when I first started with the Institute, I worked in one of our alternative schools that we run ourselves. We're probably a little punitive. We did a lot of getting up in people's faces. And so what we found, though, over time was a very nice balance, and Bruce touched on it in his presentation, of having a firm sense of discipline in what we expect from students and, frankly, from staff, but doing it in a context of care and support for the person as an individual. So that's what I'm going to talk about, and we'll talk about how that relates to bullying. So just real brief. There we go. IIRP we're headquartered in the U.S., but we have offices in the UK, Hungary, Canada, Australia, and then we license other people to provide our trainings in different places around the world. So Bruce talked about some of the great things that have been going on in the UK. We're doing a lot of training in schools in Canada and Australia as well. Okay. So the aim of restorative practices in schools, as the most simple way that we can say it, is to develop community and manage conflict and tensions by repairing harm and restoring relationships. The fundamental hypothesis, which I think bears itself out, and I've seen it work in all manner of schools in the U.S., from the most toughest urban schools you can think of to suburban, rich, middle class, working class, extremely rural schools, and in foreign countries, that the fundamental thing that motivates people, the number one reason why people will or will not, it's not the only reason, but the most important reason why people will or will not do the right thing, treat each other well, treat one another with respect, do what's asked of them by authority figures, even if they're not real happy about it. The number one reason, the number one factor, is levels of connection, relationships, and the strength of the community that surrounds them. And I've done trainings all over the world, and very few, I don't think I've ever run into anyone that actually disagreed with that. The question is, if you believe that, how do we actually put that into practice, or even do we put that into practice in the way that we manage school discipline and school culture? So what we created out of our experience running our own programs, we have 8 of our own schools that we administer. We run foster group homes. We do family services and a range of other things. In the 90s, we tried to come up with a language and a framework that describes what we had developed through trial and error, and to try and explain why it was that it was working and getting results that other programs weren't getting. We came to call it restorative practices, borrowing the word restorative from the restorative justice movement, which some of you may be familiar with, but calling it practices because it wasn't just justice. It wasn't just catching people after something bad had happened and doing things to repair the harm. We do those things, but we were also doing a range of other proactive things that really fell into primary prevention, proactively strengthening community and relationships, engaging children, giving them a say in what happens, teaching them basically how to interact with each other in a way that was real, personal, and direct, while building strong relationships. So I'm going to do an exercise in a minute, and I can't hear everyone speaking back to me, but I'll do it the way we do it in the first training that we usually have schools take. So I want you to think about a person from your life that you respected the most, ideally from when you were young. So if you think about authority figures from your childhood, it might not be mom or dad. It might be a coach, a mentor, a counselor, a teacher, aunt, uncle, a priest, a local pastor, whoever that person was for you that you really respected, that authority figure. And think about how did they treat you? And if you could think about the characteristics that this person had, and if you could think about what were the characteristics this person had that made you respect them so much. And if you had to pick just one, like the top characteristic in your head, just think about what that might be. So usually, in my experience, people say things like they were really supportive, caring, but you also hear things like tough, high expectations, disciplinarian, yet I always knew that they cared about me. The things that people say, I actually have a colleague in Australia that puts up a list, and it's usually everything that everyone said. Literally, universally, around the globe, everywhere I've done this training, even this year alone, we've done trainings in South America and Colombia, through all around the U.S. People say the same things, and the reason is it's because people are fundamentally hardwired humans, for whatever reason, to respond to a certain kind of use of authority best, and by extension, the kind of school culture best. So the things that people say when they describe that person, that authority figure from your life that you respect, they generally fall into two categories, things having to do with control and things having to do with support. So if you think of control as limit setting, discipline, firm boundaries, setting high expectations, and if you think of support as encouragement, nurturing, giving people the resources they need to make changes, and you graph those both from low to high, you get basically what we call the social discipline window, 4 different ways of dealing with discipline, 4 different ways of responding to wrongdoing, and really 4 different kinds of school cultures. And we train in other areas as well, so it's not just schools, but we'll keep it to schools in this discussion. So now if you think about the high control, low support box, I'll put the words up. High control, low support, it's the punitive box, doing things to people. Basically the philosophy is that I just want you to comply with what I want you to do, that I have the power to inflict pain and discomfort on you until I get you to comply with my demands. The good thing about that box, so lots of control with very little support. The good thing about that box is if you're good at it, not everybody is, it can be efficient. It's actually in some ways the quickest way to get someone to stop doing one thing and to start doing another. If all you want is compliance, if you don't care that they change their mindset, if you don't care that they become a better person, you just want them to stop doing one thing and start doing another. That's actually kind of efficient in the short term. The problem with that box, and it's the default setting of most school disciplinary systems, the problem with that is that it always engenders resistance. It doesn't do a good job at getting people to make internal changes. Most of the work winds up actually being done by authority figures instead of students, because you basically have to play the if I catch you, I punish you game. And it has an actual tendency to form negative subcultures. And schools that have the highest amount of, the most intensive kind of punitive cultures actually show the highest, the lowest levels of student perception of safety, even more so than schools that are just kind of neglectful and chaotic, which no one is arguing for either. But if all it is a very harsh, authoritarian, punitive environment, it actually doesn't lead to people feeling safer. It actually is quite the opposite. What's usually thought of as the opposite of that, but actually we call it two sides of the same coin, is the permissive approach, which is if we just love kids enough, if we just provide enough support and resources, kids will behave because they feel good about us or they feel loved. Like that's enough to get people to make changes. And of course that doesn't work either. Just throwing support and love love and resources at people isn't really enough. Most of us, I was just doing a training at a high school today, and I said, look, I don't show up for work hoping that I have a really painful growth experience. I don't show up at work hoping that someone really pushes me outside my comfort zone and makes me face things about myself and makes me grow as a person. I mean, I know that that's good for me, but it's not something I would particularly ask for. So support is one thing, but some amount of limit setting, discipline, and control is necessary for a healthy community. There's the neglectful box, just not doing anything. But this restorative box is trying to do things with people, which is high control and high support at the same time. So firm limits, clear sense of discipline. We do a lot of work with schools on setting clear expectations, or at least consistent expectations. One of the problems in the school I was at today was everyone said when they were identifying problems with students that students are disrespectful, they don't follow expectations and whatever. And once we had some discussion around what the expectations were, there were a dozen different expectations in the room around some very important issues. So, you know, there's an issue there of, well, is it that the students aren't being compliant, or is it that you haven't taken the time to actually be consistent and explicit around what you expect? So lots of control, limit setting, discipline, but in a context of care, support, and nurturing for the student as an individual. So the short way we like to describe it is, instead of doing things to people or for people, we try to do things with people. It's retaining all of your authority and power as authority figures. I would say not only do you have the right, I think you have the responsibility as an education professional, administration, or teacher to set boundaries and determine what kind of school culture you're going to have. But it needs to be done in such a way that people feel like they have a voice, like they have a role, and that they have strong relationships with the people around them. The schools that feel like that are the ones where I would say you really have community. I mean, most schools talk about that our school is a community. But I've worked in places that it may have been a pleasant place to work, but it wasn't a community, even if it was, you know, more or less fine. Schools that I think that you could really call communities are ones with strong, tight relational bonds between students to students, staff to staff, and staff to students. So really what we do, and we're really cautious to tell people, look, this isn't really something new. The reason people give the same answers to that question about the person you most respect and some of the other exercises that we do, because really all we're doing is describing what has probably fundamentally been true about people and relationships since time immemorial. We're just putting a language and a structure with it that you don't usually get taught in graduate school before you become a teacher. So people usually find they do a lot of it intuitively, and they also find that they can do a lot more if they have a strategic focus and a way to describe what it is they're doing that actually works. So that's really what we teach people how to do, is to take the best practice of what they already do with kids, do more of it, and do it more strategically. And then, you know, we have a 2-year our program is called Safer, Saner Schools. We have a 2-year process where we try to implant that in all its different forms all throughout the school culture. So it's not something that, you know, you just a few people in the building go do. We really try to change the mindset of the way staff deal with students, the way students interact with each other, and the way administration manages staff in the building. So, all right. So just briefly, there's a range of things we teach people to do that are inside that with box. Some of which are informal, some of which are formal. Formal processes by themselves will not change the culture of a building. It would be great if they would, because that would be a lot more efficient in terms of time and in some ways resources. But just having even one of our processes that we teach is a thing called formal conferencing, where it's a very structured process after someone's been harmed, where they have a chance to sit down and face directly the people that they've affected, and have to hear from people how they, you know, what kind of harm was done to them. People get a chance to share their emotions, get a chance to ask for what they need from each other in terms of to repair the harm that was done. Even those by themselves, the schools always did that in response to wrongdoing, in and of itself would not change necessarily the way the building feels. If you want to change culture, you have to change proactive things, not just reactive things, and you have to change the way people interact with each other informally as well. So just briefly, the range of things we teach people to do is things like affective statements and questions, what I would call in the training learning how to be real. So when things happen between people, we don't hide behind our professional language. We find a way that's appropriate within our role to be direct and emotional and affective with students. So instead of saying things like, your behavior's been entirely inappropriate over the last 2 weeks and you really need to think about, instead of saying things like that, saying things like, when you come into my room and you behave like you did today, it makes me feel like you don't care about me, you don't care about the other people here, and frankly, I'm really angry because I've been spending a lot of extra time with you, and it's like you throw that back in my face. So just simple kinds of being able to be real and open and honest about relationship issues, and particularly in your language with kids. Those are the things we teach people how to do, as well as teaching people how to catch kids doing things right, which we don't usually spend a lot of time on. So not just sharing how you were affected negatively when children misbehave, but telling students the positive things too, how much you care about them, how much you believe in them, how proud you are when they make small progress and things like that. So small impromptu conferences are just informal ways to bring groups of students or 1 or 2 students together when something has happened as an incident. We spend a lot of time teaching things called circles, which are fairly structured processes that build community, help students get to know one another. In the classroom, we teach teachers to use them for instruction, not just for behavior and for sharing. So it's not teaching group therapy in the English class, but actually using them to do instruction in a way that's more engaging, gives students basically the chance to practice how to deal with one another directly and to talk to one another, as well as to get to know one another. And then I talked a little bit about formal conferencing. So what I want to do next, I'm going to show a short video, and I have to just prep it a little bit with, it's about 9 minutes. Depending on the speed of people's internet connections, the one on this end should be pretty good, but depending on your speed there, wherever you're following along, there may be a delay in the video. So it might be a little annoying for those that have a connection issue or speed issue. So I just want to prep you with that ahead of time. But hopefully it'll work well for most of the people that are on the webinar. This is a video called The Transformation of West Philadelphia High School. At first I was going to show a different video, but sort of like, so West Philadelphia is one of the historically toughest high schools probably in the country, but definitely inside the Philadelphia school district. This is, when you think of extreme urban schools, this pretty much is the dictionary definition. So it's a school with a lot of really serious incidents every year. You know, they have serious assaults. You'll see at one point in the video they talk about there's less fires in the building, meaning fires set intentionally. So it's probably way beyond what a lot of you deal with in your schools. But I think it's appropriate. Number one of the things that impressed me most about the students and the transformation that was made at this school is the things that work and the reason that restorative practices worked at that school are the same reasons they work anywhere else. These are students and children that people have written off. I mean, there was actually things in the paper like, why don't they just put some bars on the windows and lock the door and call it a prison, because that's really what it should be. That really people that a lot of people had thought could never make progress. And the things that worked in that building are the things that would have worked anywhere else. Giving students a voice, having consistent expectations amongst the adults in the building, stop just putting out fires all day long, literal and figurative, and start proactively planning about how to build an actual community and build relationships amongst people, and engaging the students for solutions on what was actually going to work to change things, and teaching people how to deal with one another directly without using their fists or bullying one another. So I'm going to let this video go. Hopefully it works well for everybody, and I'll let them talk for themselves. Mila, am I good?
Yes. Yep, we see it.
Okay.
John, I think you need to come back with the sound, though. Yeah, John, we still need the sound on your computer.
This year so far, we're down an additional 25% over what we ended up with last year.
We're good now.
I know for a fact, based on what has been reported as far as serious incidents in the school, I know that we're going to get off that list of specifically dangerous schools. When we had numerous fires last year. This year, I don't think we had one fire.
This climate of disrespect is one of the problems at West Philadelphia High School, and that no one is teaching the social skills that my kids, for the most part, don't have. And so they understand that I shouldn't break this rule, but I only understand it as far as because you said so.
We need something besides what we have in terms of punishment, but never really talk about it. I personally have an issue with that. Sometimes it's talk, and that's what I think is sort of practice. You have to deal with these young folks on their level, and what I'm dealing with now is to understand the issues that they bring with them into the and those are the main things. The issues that they bring with them into the prevent them from getting a good education. So that's the reason why.
As a school that has a lot of social climate issues, utilizing restorative practices and building culture, positive social culture, I mean, is essential to the functioning of any, school. It's essential. And so content and material means nothing without, relationships.
I needed to find something that would help me have a different kind of interaction with my students. And the main thing that I liked initially about restorative practice was that whole idea of building. So in September when we started school, the principal encouraged us to the circle, kind of just to build a family. So I started doing it in my classes, and I liked it. I found that my students liked it as well. And I can feel that it has more of a family interaction. I can see the difference in my students, and also see the difference in my behavior. Because I can be very aggressive, and I am very aggressive with my students, but I do not think.
So there was sort of a looming conflict between two groups of girls. It was pretty evident that something physical was going to happen, and so myself and another teacher and the security guard sort of took it on ourselves to try to, reach an agreement between the girls and really get to the bottom of why this was happening. So we used a circle and some of the other the conference training we received for restorative practices, and so we implemented the circle, and the girls never fought.
We had two different cliques, and basically, it boiled down to one girl looking at the other girl wrong, and why you basically bothering me, that kind of thing. And we sat them down. It must have been about 6 or 7 young ladies. So we sat them down, and we allowed each of them to tell exactly how they were feeling about what was going on in the school. And when it was over with, we found out that it was really a misunderstanding. And so everybody felt good and went on about our business.
95% of the problems we have are miscommunication. And so the act of communicating without using violence is a powerful act.
Before we had circles at our school, there was a lot of fights, riots, problems. There was just a lot of confusion. So I think circles help because they express a student's feelings and stuff more instead of violence and stuff. Just talking in a circle could just, also one talking in a circle could just avoid violence.
Before we had circles in our school was always just crazy and wild, and there was nothing else to do.
Now that we have circles at our school, it's just like more calm and collective, and we get to talk around our peers and sis and respectfully and tell them how we feel and what's the problem. Kids aren't so much afraid. They listen to what one another has to say now, and they kind of agree with one another. Circles have changed our class because we've had to talk to one another. Like, it's not just the teachers, all of us together. So we kind of had to come as a team and talk. When something's bothering me, circles help me relax because I'm talking to someone. With me, when I am frustrated, sad, and all these other emotions, I need to talk to someone.
I think the turning moment, and I could see it in the students' faces, is when they realized they had a say. They realized they were participants, that they were going to be listened to. They could have input.
We tried a restorative practices conference, but we asked the teacher, could we put the kids in a circle, and could we have them share their perception about what's happening in your class, and would you be open to hearing that? And so the teacher was very good about being comfortable with being vulnerable in that way. And the kids took it very seriously, and they had some very clear and concrete things to say about their role in the class and why they maybe weren't doing the things that they should have been doing, what they saw as the teacher's role and why things weren't going the way they should go in the class. And to the teacher's credit, I mean, she took notes, and she really did try to make corrections in terms of what the kids had talked about.
Circles help you behave because, like, you get to, like, tell everybody about you, like, what's going on. You get to express your feelings, your emotions, anything that you got wrong, anything that's wrong, you get to tell them, tell the students, you get to tell the teachers, and you don't got to be afraid because you know that now, since we're all in a circle, you get to talk about whatever you want. The CFC should encourage the use of restorative practices and support it. But it seems to work. Every time that we've had circles in all these programs, we've had positive results. Circles have helped this school because now we don't have as many conflicts and fights and stuff like that. Everybody has their own opinion, and you can get to do what everybody has to say. My advice would be to try it. What I like about restorative practice, I don't think it's just a new thing on the block. Like, most teachers have walked down the road and looking for different things. You find different things, they're in, they're out. Restorative practices is really like a way of life.
I believe very strongly in restorative practice. I have seen a change here in this school, West Philadelphia High School, using it. And I believe restorative practices is useful not only in our school, but in any school.
I think it's one of the best things that practice place for it.
Restorative practices is a tougher in a school. It doesn't get any tougher than West Philadelphia High School.
Okay, so hopefully that worked for people. Just briefly, you can see my screen. So I won't go through the research now because there's not time, but you can see some of the dramatic results at West Philadelphia and some other places. If you go to safersanerschools.org, that video, you can actually stream it from the website. And then this report here is a downloadable PDF, Improving School Climate, Finding Some Schools Implementing Restorative Practices. The nice thing about the research in this report, and this was edited by, edited by a national research director for the Council for Great City Schools, Sharon Lewis. Sorry. And we grouped the research in terms of different types of schools. So it'll just say like large urban high school, medium-sized suburban high school, rural elementary school. So you can see how restorative practices have been effective in a lot of different settings. How am I on time? Have I used up my airtime?
Well, I'd like to keep a little bit of time at the end for questions. So maybe maybe just a couple more minutes.
Okay, great. I'll wrap up.
Okay.
So you can see some of that there. Just going back to the issue of bullying, we do a 3-hour bullying training in addition to the other. We have a whole school change program. Like I said, it's a large program. It's a 2-year program. It's intensive. It involves organizational change, support, and a lot of other things. We also get hired by schools to do sort of more limited trainings, which we're happy to do as well. So we had a lot of demand. People were demanding that we have a training that was called bullying, or preventing bullying with restorative practices. One of the things we said to a principal who had been implementing restorative practices for like 2 years and had done fantastic at Palisades High School in Pennsylvania, he said, do you have a bullying training? I'm getting pressed. I got to have a bullying training. And what we told him was, you already had it. I mean, basically what you're teaching students how to do is build relationships with one another, how to talk to one another directly about behavioral issues, good, bad, or otherwise. You're teaching staff to actually get to the root of problems with students. So those skills, they prevent a range of things. Bullying is one of them. But some of the things just specifically that I have said about bullying is we've really pushed. One thing is we really pushed in our trainings to teach people not to use the term bully. And I know a lot of people are used to using it. It's out there in a lot of the literature and whatnot, because it leads to this idea that there's two kinds of kids, bullies and victims. The reality is anyone that's, you can look, whether you look at the research or you just think back to your own life, and I do this in one of my trainings for bullying, is I ask the adults to think about different behaviors they've done over the years. The reality is everyone has bullied someone, usually, at one point or another. Most people have also been the victim of it at one point or another. So you're not dealing with two completely different types of people, because a lot of policy gets built around basically trying to find perps, for lack of a better word. That if we just identify the bully as if that's a fixed quantity and remove them or deal with them or whatever, that will remove the problem, and it doesn't. There are certainly people who habitually harm other people. I'd be the first to admit that. So that's a given. But permanently stigmatizing and labeling people is not a good way to get people to change, if that's the goal. So we try to talk about behavior, bullying behavior, coercive behavior, behavior where the power is unequal between the two people. And we also talk a lot about there's a bit of net widening going on with bullying, too, that you need to be a little cautious of. And I'm not going to go too far into it now, of a lot of things are getting called bullying that may or may not be. It depends. And there's some debate about what the definition is. From a restorative practice perspective, frankly, it doesn't really matter all that much, because the goal of what restorative practices works on is, like I said, dealing with people directly, dealing with misbehavior as harm done to people in relationships, not just infractions against rules. So in some ways, it doesn't necessarily matter what the behavior is. The second thing, and then this will be the last thing, there are some bullying programs that the trainers teach, let me say, Oveus is one of them, usually teach that you never bring people who've been bullied and people that they harmed together face-to-face, because the power is always unequal. And that's one of the things that we've disagreed with. We've always said that if you're saying that you never bring people face-to-face, what you're actually saying is when they do meet face-to-face, because they will when you're not there, you're not going to be there to help and support them, because they're going to see each other in the bathroom, in the hallway, in the locker room, or the bus stop, or whatever. Now, there are plenty of instances when you wouldn't bring people face-to-face where it would be victimizing, and we go into the whole range about how you prevent that sort of thing. But the idea that you never do it isn't very helpful, and actually prevents the kind of direct meeting of needs that actually needs to occur. And we talked to some national folks from Oveus, and they said, interestingly, that was never their intention. They know that Oveus trainers train that. They said originally they wanted to teach things like restorative practices, where after you've set a climate where it wasn't okay and people were going to speak up about it, when stuff happens, that in certain cases it would be really effective to bring people together or to bring groups together to talk about the impact, confront one another if necessary. But they said that they didn't know how to train it, so in the early days they just stopped telling people to do that, and then it's kind of developed into this dogma that you don't do that ever. But they said it was never their intention, and that was from two of the founders, actually, which is very interesting. So we're having a lot of discussions in PA about actually combining and working together in a lot of ways, because there's some great things about that program in terms of just education around the issues. But dealing with, the direct impacts and effects and doing the primary prevention, that's where restorative practices had a big impact. I'll stop there.
Thanks, John. That was great information. And I just have one question, and then I have a few others I'd like to ask. One for you, John, is whether you, when in your experience, do you go in and train the entire staff, or not you personally, but the restorative practices, do they work with the staff in its entirety, or do they tend to work with teachers only, or with administrators, or how does that work the best?
Yeah, well, best is the question. People can do a variety of things. I mean, some people just come to us as individuals for training, but the Safer Senior Schools program is all staff, meaning everyone who has contact with children, and honestly, some of the ones that might not, because we do as much staff to staff as well. So yeah, we do all staff trainings and implementation. Now some, depending on your role, you might get some things that are different, but cafeteria workers, hallway monitors, parent volunteers, basically anyone who interacts with the school community should be on the same page in terms of the kind of community that you want to build and the need to build those skills.
So it is really looking at it as a community rather than just different sectors of the school.
Correct, yeah. I mean, and then we also engage parents and students. So it's top to bottom. Like, if you really are serious about culture change, those are the things you need to do. And that's a big commitment, and it's not all schools want that. But that's what makes the big impact. So, yeah. And that's what also prevents, I mean, the biggest headache for teachers is there's 1,000 programs that come and go. And there is a new flavor of the month every month. And they usually go away after a couple of years, either because the funding goes away or the 3 people that were in charge of it no longer work there, or the leadership turns over. So one of the things that we try and do in terms of implementation is to make sure we're making a lasting culture change and strategically putting things in place so that it survives personalities and people, and that there's a lot of multiple areas of pressure to keep it moving. So that it lasts over time.
Great. And Bruce, are you still on? I had a couple of questions for you about your WeTip experience that you talked with a bit.
Milo, I'm still on, yes.
Great, good. One question was who reviews those calls and determines what the appropriate response is? What's that sort of chain of reaction?
That's an excellent question. All WeTip does is it gets information to the people who need it. They basically get it to the people who need it. Well, who are the people who need it? The district basically need, and this is a yearly thing, they need to fill out what we call a contact sheet. That contact sheet varies from district to district. Basically, the superintendent or whoever he delegates puts down who they want to be contacted in the event of a tip. Usually it's the superintendent, it might be an SRO, might be the chief of police, it might be police officer, somebody in there that they'd want to know. And within hours or less, all those people on the contact sheet's going to get a notification that there was a tip, and here is what we know. And so, and then it's up to the district to basically decide what to do. Is this a tip worth acting on? Almost always it is. Something I want to stress here is when we got our Project Guardian gave us our first-year funding for the statewide program. At that time, a police chief, who at that time was Senator Fecht, was there, and he was on the board, and he basically told us that there had never been a bogus, in his experience, on the beta test in Laramie 1 since the year 2000. So from 2000 to 2007, there had never been a bogus tip. So someone wanted to cause trouble, so he put the tip on Jamie Sue or whoever he's trying to frame up. They simply flatly have never had that happen. There was always legitimacy when they followed up on it. So it goes to basically whoever the district wants the tip to go to, and that's on the contact sheet, which we remind districts to do every year. Now, if they don't do anything, then the old contact sheet still is valid. You know, so.
Right. And how do you determine whether this is all working? What's your measure of effectiveness on this?
That's an excellent question as well. I have several things to say. Number one, when kids have another place to go, by definition, you have more options, and that's one measure of success because it exists and kids can use it. Number two, there have been many convictions around the state. There's been meth convictions. We know that. There's a list. We tip what they do is they give you a printout every month, and they give you a printout of tips you got. And at the end of the year, they give out a printout of known convictions for those tips. So you've got an indicator of convictions happening. We know that in one part of the state, there was one student that had purposed to stab a teacher and one of his parents, and that was derailed because of the tip. So people's lives are being saved. There are convictions, and that's how those are indicators that it's working.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much, Bruce, and thank you very much, John. Let's see. I closed the screen, but let me just give you, I wanted to give you their contact information again. If you Bruce, you want to just spell out your email address, if you wouldn't mind, and the same with you, John. And their contact information will also post on our website, peakstoprairies.org, and under the webinar section. But just as a closing, Bruce, your contact info?
Oh, certainly. I urge anyone who's listening, I urge you to call me. We'd love to get calls, talk about any school safety issue you want. We would like to hear from you. I can be reached at B as in Bruce, Hayes, the digit 1, so it's bhayes1 at educ dot, the word state, .wy.us.
Thank you. And John?
Sure. My email address is john, B as in boy, AILIE, at iirp.org. Most people will spell my last name wrong. So when in doubt, you can always just go to the website and call the contact number. But again, it's john, B as in boy, AILIE, at iirp.org. And my direct line is 267-246-5891. That's 267-246-5891.
Great, thank you. And your website again is www.iirp.org, correct?
Correct, or safersanerschools.org is our schools program website.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much. And with that, I'm going to close out this webinar, and I look forward to your participation in our future webinars. First aid, integrated pest management, and waste reduction recycling. Thank you very much.